this beautiful setting and beautiful invitation. What we'll be talking about today. We will try to understand how the Mediterranean foraging works, and I will do that going back to the research I and my group did in the last 20 years. So, everyone knows what is the Mediterranean diet. It's one of the traditional dietary systems we have in the world. It's not the best one. It's just maybe more studied than other dietary systems. Basically, it's a system which originated in the Fertile Crescent with the discovery of agriculture, with the domestication of cereals, so highly relying on cereals, vegetables, especially wild vegetables, but of course olive. We will come back to this point. Olive. The olive domestication, of course, didn't happen immediately at the start of the Neolithic revolution, but about 4,000 years later. Moderate consumption of fish, of dairy products, and of meat, especially red meat, and of course the red wine came also later to this dietary system. Now, what we don't know much in this dietary system, which have been very well studied by nutritionists over the last 40 years, is about the wild vegetables. This wild or semi-domesticated portion of plants, which mainly grow in anthropogenic environments, and they are very important nowadays. The revival of this hidden portion of the Mediterranean diet has been facilitated in the past decades by what I call the foraging euphoria, which, by the way, is all over the world. That's why we are here. The interest for wild food plants. Nowadays, we have different prominent chefs, not nowadays, since at least 1 or 2 decades, who are completely dedicated in promoting these wild food plants, not of course specifically belonging to the Mediterranean diet. But the main point of the foraging is that we have to deal with the species which are largely unexplored, both biologically, ecologically, but especially in terms of their cultural meaning, in terms of social science. And the two most prominent, in my opinion, teachers of these incredible, insanely incredible interactions between culture and nature are Andrea Pieroni and Nina Etkin. Andrea Pieroni, the founder of the International Society of Ethnobiology, was used to say that the link between nature and culture is inextricable. Well, Nina Etkin, working on the continuum between food and medicine, was very much looking at the biocultural and co-evolutionary path of this system. This is what we find in Scopus. This not only deal with ethnobotany, but with also, of course, chemistry of wild food plants, with biology of wild food plants. And you can see that actually at the end of the 90s, there were very few crazy people dealing with this topic we are discussing today in the Congress, and nowadays we have about 1,000 papers per year. So it's not that much, but it's incredibly a lot. This happened in 2 decades. Now let's take the case of southern Italy. It could be taken also in other areas of the Mediterranean, but is where I started my research. In southern Italy, wild vegetables especially in rural areas, are still collected normally by women, and they represent an important asset in the domestic care, in the domestic production of food, in the domestic health care, and also some of these vegetables are sold in informal markets, as we have seen yesterday. And the women are those in charge of collecting these vegetables, processing these vegetables. There are very few vegetables, wild vegetables, that are collected by men or sometimes also by teenagers, but they are really very few. Most of them are collected by women. In any case, they are processed by women in the kitchen, of course. The wild vegetables in southern Italy is embedded into the landscape, is embedded into the management of a typical post-Neolithic Mediterranean landscape, where you have patches of cereals, where you have olive orchards and vineyards. The wild vegetables, in different amount, different species, are collected in these areas. And also in the interstitial areas in the secondary forest. So they are the result of this landscape, of this highly manipulated landscape. And they are also the result of mental maps the people have when they address the issue of wild vegetables. For example, in this village, which is a typical Mediterranean village called the Ginestra, basically Ginestra means genista, the Spanish broom, which is an important part of the landscape there, especially when it flowers, of course, in May. All the countryside is yellow. In this village, the people identify two important terms for underlining the wild plants. One term is bara, which means everything green which you cannot eat. And one thing is diacra, which means something you can eat. If someone of you is at home with linguistics, will recognize that diacra is very similar to the name of cabbage nowadays in Albania, which is lacquer. And indeed, in this village, the first inhabitants came from Albania about 500 years ago. They were the people escaping the Ottoman occupation of Albania, and they found a refugium in southern Italy. And if we go more in depth, we can see that the wild vegetables they are collected in this village are not just by random. They are specific wild vegetables. They are considered very close brothers or sisters of other wild vegetables. And there is a very important logic in that. For example, the prototype of this central group of vegetables are Asteraceae, Cichorioideae, which are very bitter. The most important is white chicory, but other plants are considered close. What is a prototype? It's something which is considered a reference in terms of cognition, and is also a reference culturally. So let's say the people go around the woman and don't find the cichorium at the center. Then we gather other things that are close by. So there are specific patterns. The people do not collect, of course, you know better than me, by random. Otherwise, as ethnobotanists, we wouldn't exist. As recently I had to read in a review of some colleagues, I think in NDPI, this colleague, botanist, was most possibly botanist, addressing the point that, well, the people eat what they found around. But if the people eat what they found around, we shouldn't be here. We can close our job and find another job. Because actually it's the contrary. The people don't do things by random, and that's why there is an ethnobotany. because we believe that there are certain cultural constructions bringing us to choose specific plants. The people don't not choose plants based on theoretical edibility, because most of the plants which are very interesting in foraging are actually toxic, and the people know how to detoxify. While there are many plants that are toxic, the people don't touch. So these kind of cognitive categories do exist in this village, but everywhere in the world, also for what concerns taste. So the white plants, which are very beloved in this area, are especially those, they have the taste which is grouped in the cluster on the right. So they are bitter, but this bitterness, which is actually a covert category, is not expressed by a word, is subdivided in other different kind of taste. So actually the taste bitter means bitter, what I would call bitter, the bitterness of chicory, is what is called astringent, which is lapus, and which is bitter lemony, bitter sour, which is agret. This cognitive category of the taste is very quintessential in the Mediterranean diet. While taste, we were discussing just 2 minutes ago with Professor Wuchai, is most possibly less relevant in Asia, where you have the texture which is relevant, you have the odor which is relevant. Taste and this specific strong taste are crucial in the Mediterranean diet. Let's go ahead. This bitterness is very important, especially for the food medicine domain. That means those plants foraged, they are eaten, and they are considered good for the health. So if a plant is too bitter, it's just a medicine. But if the plant is substantially bitter or strong in taste or pungent, as we would correctly say in sensory science to define the strong taste of brassicas, is considered good and very important. So the folk knowledge of Mediterranean diet foraging is linked to the traditional management of landscape, health perceptions. These are embedded in these very sophisticated systems. Many of these plants, this was actually an homage on Michael Heinrich. I am a former postdoc of Professor Heinrich, and we started together in trying to assess the antioxidant properties of white vegetables of the Mediterranean foraging. And this is still a very seminal work. 20 years ago, we analyzed more than 120 plants and the antioxidant activity. Actually, not much has been done in these 20 years, unluckily. The Mediterranean diet has taken the most spectacular, let's say, ingredients like tomatoes, nowadays ingredients like tomatoes, peppers, and cabbage, and different kind of allium, and has gone more in depth in knowing the chemistry and pharmacology of these products, but the white vegetables are still understudied. Most important white vegetable, which is the most antioxidant activity plant we have possibly in Europe, is Muscarium mosum. And nowadays we see that we have also more research on this plant. The Muscarium mosum is very important in the study area and in the eastern of the Mediterranean, because the bulbs are bitter, but they are also activating the receptors of menthol. So they have a fresh bitterness, which is very beloved by the people. This is one of the most prominent plants of the Mediterranean diet. But let's make now a jump. Let's go about 1,000, how many? 3,000 kilometers east of southern Italy in the Ninive Plain. The Ninive Plain, which has been unluckily famous in the last years for the horrible behavior of Daesh, of the Islamic State, killing minorities, killing many peoples, is however one of the most impressive areas of the world. Is of course south of these mountains, which are basically the prodromes of the mountains we can find in northern Iraq, let's say going in direction north, in direction Turkey and Iran. And in this plateau, the people still have a diet which is not Mediterranean from first glance, because it's a typical pastoralist, I would say post-pastoralist diet, as you can find many times in the Middle East, with a lot of meat, but there are herbs. They are eaten raw as shabzi, as in the Persian tradition of eating raw white vegetables as a side dish, and also cooked. And the markets are full of white vegetables. And these are the communities living in the Nineveh plain. Nowadays, this part of the world is in the autonomous region of Kurdistan in northern Iraq. There are different kind of peoples with different religions, and that's why this area became a target for the Islamic State. The Kurdish foragers go up in the villages of this plain. The foragers, they have a Kurdish origin. That means most possibly coming 1,000 years ago from the Iranian Persian plateau. They see the nature just liking the mountains and going up. They like the pastoralist foraging, and they collect many important plants culturally in this area. For example, the wild rhubarb, which is of course
like
collected also in Central Asia, still coming from this pastoralist idea. The crunchiness is very beloved, is eaten socially as a kind of amuse-gueule, or when we have guests at home. And actually, a very important plant for exactly the same kind of use is this one, is an apiaceae, which is collected by the teenagers on the cliffs of the first mountains, and is very aromatic, and is again eaten raw socially, in social gatherings. This plant is, for example, fully unknown phytochemically and pharmacologically. And then, of course, also very well known wild vegetables in the Middle East, like the so-called Eastern Mediterranean artichoke, Gundelia turneforti, which is very much collected as an important cultural element of the spring diet. Is stewed and then eaten with naan, different kind of Not to forget the detoxification of a few araceae, very important in Kurdistan. These are very important plant. They are detoxified by boiling the leaves with a lot of sumac and changing a couple of times the water. The final dish is basically mixed with onions and is still strong in taste, and is extremely beloved. Then some plants which are considered ornamental in Europe. Tulipa is a typical Kurdish amuse-gueule. It's a typical Kurdish plant of which the peoples love to eat the bulbs. The hypogean parts is very neutral in taste. The people appreciate the texture. This is a plant which is considered very beautiful in Kurdistan. It's not the tulip. The tulip became ornamental when they arrived to Constantinople, Sultan court, and then the Europeans discovered the tulips there. Actually, the plant which is considered beautiful in Kurdistan is papaver dubium, and especially fritillaria. Also, the corms of cornus are eaten. Different species of Ornithogallum, which is actually not very far from the Leopoldia, from Muscari. We have seen 2 minutes before. In the same village in the Plain, there are other peoples living. They are Christians, they are not Muslims. They go down in the plain to collect. So they live in the same village, but they see the nature is completely different way, in a kind of different way given by different glasses. And these peoples collect what we would call the proto-Mediterranean plants. Ancusa, Borasinaceae, very strong bitter Asteraceae like the white lettuce, and of course also Malva, which is very important for the Sarma. The Sarma in the Nineveh plain, especially in Assyrian and Yazid community, is very crucially important if it's small. So the best wife, the best bride should be able to prepare the smallest possible Malva sylvestris Sarma. It's a little bit the different perspective of what we have in Western Europe, where everything has to be bigger. And then Silybum nasturtium, plant with a specific texture of strong taste. If we see this comparison between Kurds and Assyrians, we can see that there is a slight different understanding of the importance of sourness and bitterness. What does it mean? It means that actually what we collect is also very much related to the human ecology, to the prevalent pastoralist or horticulturalist customs. This is something which is guiding a lot of data we have. Because, as you know better than me, in the Neolithic settlement, 12,000 years ago, when the first humans started to cultivate plants and to breed animals, this harmony of horticulturalists and pastoralists was very soon broken. And that's why for millennia we have had in Eurasia peoples especially known for their pastoralism, not exclusively but especially, and people especially known by the horticulturalism. The Mediterranean diet is the result of both, depending on the place of the Mediterranean in which pastoralism has been more or less important, or horticulturalism more or less important. Let's go to what is our interest in the past years. That means the area between the Nineveh plain, where this system originated, where these bitter plants love originated, and the central Mediterranean, from where my research started 30 years ago in southern Italy. The Greek Isles, they are very important in order to understand what's happening in this long journey of this diet from the Fertile Crescent to the central of the Mediterranean, a journey which lasted about 5,000 years. 1 kilometer per year the agricultural system moved. I know that to talk about this in a context in which in this part of Asia you have had also a very impressive start of domestication is a little bit hilarious. But please note that this is the origin of agriculture. You have your origin of agriculture, but unluckily it's 4,000 years later. So that's why it's more interesting to see what's happening exactly in this system, when this system moved westward. And if we take the data, a few data, there are much more, we are now preparing a paper with much more data and the use of statistical analysis, which is more sophisticated than we did here. If we take the data on Mediterranean foraging, based on ethnobotanical reliable sources, we can see that in this area we have the bitterness, and we can see that there are a few locations that are more attached to bitterness. And the few ones, they are very far from the bitterness. In particular here, we have in this area where the bitterness is very important, Sicily, we have Icaria. Icaria is one of the blue zones of the world where where we suppose that a specific diet exists, like in Okinawa, because the epidemiological data shows that people live longer. Crete, very important in the Mediterranean evolution of the foraging. But interesting is how Armenians are so far from the bitterness. We have a few data from geneticians telling us that Armenians are bitter super testers. That means genetically they perceive bitterness exaggerated. And this is maybe why they don't like bitter vegetables. So there are genetic, of course, components, but there are also cultural components. And if you see Assyrians here, that means the possible descendants of those who discovered agriculture, they actually have a diet which does not look like very bitter in terms of foraging. This is a study we have done recently on a specific spot of Crete, which is supposed to be inhabited by the genetically by those descendants of the Minoans. You know that the Minoans in Eurasia have been one of the pillars of the Mediterranean culture. And we can see that actually in the city, the love for bitterness is very big, and especially for boiling bitter vegetables. Now, the predominance of bitter vegetables in the Mediterranean diet is remarkable, especially in Greece, not exclusively, of course also in the Levant, of course among the Christians of Lebanon. Is this an effect of the olive culture of the Christian fasting? These are the two hypotheses we are working at the moment. Olive culture may have exposed the people to a regular intake of bitterness every day. The Christian lens, of course, olive diffusion and culture started 4,000–5,000 years later, the start of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. The Christian fasting started, of course, even much later, but the Christian fasting may have played a role in reiterating the importance of eating bitter. What do we need in the Mediterranean and maybe everywhere in the world? Much more field work within ad hoc areas with a lot of detailed research design, and more cross-geographical comparisons, sometimes cross-temporal, but the cross-temporal comparisons in ethnobotany in the Mediterranean are always very tricky because you do not have much data from the past, and especially using artificial intelligence and big data analysis. This is the path-breaking news of the last 2 years. We can use computer science to analyze data we were not able to analyze so far, because otherwise one postdoc or one PhD of us would have spent 10 years on an Excel file, making thousands of entries. So this is a big, big challenge. As in pharmacology, we are used to say there is not anymore in vitro or in vivo, but in silico, meaning drug discovery can happen simply by using artificial intelligence for crossing and analyzing large data set of data. The same can be done in ethnobotany. We need also ethnosensory science, which is more studies on sensory science based on cultural differences, ethnicities, religious differences, and of course sharing data. Sharing is the keyword of the future, and this is not only because, as David Graeber was used to say, sharing is moral, is good. Nothing will change in the world if we follow just only the morality. But sharing is pleasure. And as we love many things we share, no matter if are those described by David Graeber or other things, but sharing is the key word for the future. Thanks a lot.